Here on QTNA, we've talked a lot about a test day strategy called Stop, Think, and Predict. It's basically where you read the question, you stop before you read the answer choices, and you think and you predict what the answer choice is going to be. Now, it's super helpful, especially if the answer choice that you predict is one of the answer choices available, but what do you do when you predict the answer choice but it's not there? Well, let's find out on today's QTNA. So this question is interesting because right off the bat, we actually know what it's talking about, right? So we know that we're doing testing, and we know that we're doing testing by injecting randomly generated input. Stop right there. What comes to mind? If you've been studying, you should know fuzzing, right? That is a textbook definition of fuzz testing. We're inputting random input to an application to see how it responds or it reacts. Does it crash? Does it reveal sensitive information, right? How will the system respond to random input? Okay, so fuzzing is what we would predict. However, if you look at our answer choices, fuzzing is not an option. So what do? Well, obviously we just kind of panic and freak out and select one and move on. No, of course not. We think about it, okay? So if fuzzing is our answer choice, which one of these is closest to that? So let's talk about dynamic and static. But even before that, let's kind of get rid of one to make our lives easier. So which one of these just doesn't sound right? Well, SQL really doesn't make any sense because we weren't talking about a SQL database, right? That's in a way, it's too specific. So this one is not like the others, and it's wrong because it's not like the others because it's so, again, specific. We're not talking about SQL injection. Maybe that would be, certain characters we're looking for, but not just general fuzzing. You can do fuzzing with a SQL database, but again, not the best answer choice for this question. So now we're left with dynamic, static, and input validation testing. So what's the difference between dynamic and static? Well, if you understand the colloquial definition of dynamic and static, you can actually understand the definition when it comes to testing. So dynamic means what? Something that's changing, right? Or something that's running. Versus static means it's not moving, right? So in a testing environment, it's basically what we're saying is we're going to test the application by have it not run. So in the testing world, when we're looking for testing a application or doing some sort of other testing with secure coding, when we talk about static, what we're really talking about is looking at the code or code inspection. Which actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because if we're doing static testing, we're going to be reading the source code. And in order for us to read the source code, it actually can't be running. Now, dynamic is, of course, you run the application and you do some sort of test to it while it's running. So here's the question for you guys. If we're going to do fuzz testing where we input things to see how the application responds, is that dynamic or static? Well, again, we're not doing code inspection, right? We're putting something in to see how the system responds. It has to be running for us to complete this test, okay? So now we're left between dynamic and input validation. I know that you guys all know what input validation is, and in, relation to this question, it's definitely relevant, but it gets very tricky because input validation is actually an example of the opposite answer choice, right? What's input validation? Input validation is we're blocking stuff from coming in. And what's fuzzing? Actually, when we want to insert random stuff to see how the application responds. So input validation testing would more be like, okay, a user types something into the application, can we actually block it, right? This one, we actually want bad input. This one, we're blocking bad input. So it's not that. The right answer is dynamic. The better answer is fuzzing. Fuzzing is not an option. We're going with dynamic. So this is going to happen on test day, where you're going to know your stuff, but you're not going to get the answer choice that you want. And that's okay, right? You don't want to panic. Even though you studied everything in the world and you kind of know the answer right off the bat, you may have to go on a tangent with the test maker, right? You got to think like them. So my overall advice is, when this happens, which it will, don't panic. Roll with the punches. Don't be afraid to be an athlete, okay? So I'll see you next week on QTNA for more test taking tips.